Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and this time we're talking about a prediction I have. And this prediction is for Metroid Prime 4, this game that's been in development for quite some time. It was announced to be in development back in 2017, it had its restart announced back at the beginning of 2019, and today, well, I'm predicting when it's actually coming out. Now, we've talked about this before, we've been wrong about this before, but now I feel pretty confident about when it's actually coming. Could I be wrong? For sure. But I think I'm going to be making a fairly compelling case for when it will be releasing, which is sometime next year, 2023, and I think in the latter half of 2023. So today we're going to be focusing on why exactly I think Metroid Prime 4 will be coming out in 2023. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It's linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps even consider joining as a member. So before I make my case for Metroid Prime 4 coming out next year, let's first argue against Metroid Prime 4 coming out next year. And the biggest argument is that development is fluid, you never really know, something can happen, perhaps the game could even be cancelled. That is in theory possible. I would say unlikely, but definitely possible, and of course, we already know about the restart. They already had announced development for this game back in 2017. At E3 2017, they announced that the game was in development by a new team. We've heard from rumors that team was in part by Bandai Namco and Nintendo, and yet they announced that they had to scrap the project at the beginning of 2019 and start over with Retro Studios. So with game development, there's always a degree of uncertainty in terms of when a game will be finally finished. It's a fluid process. And on top of that, when it comes to a project like Metroid Prime 4, which is looking to be a fairly ambitious one, I even like to sort of compare it to The Legend of Zelda. There is only one other game that Nintendo has gone out and put out a dedicated video announcing its delay, and that was for Breath of the Wild. So, if this is anything to go by, Metroid Prime 4 in a way is like Space Zelda, and considering how much hiring we continually see from Retro Studios, it does seem like Nintendo's really gearing up for something huge here. They have a high expectation for Metroid Prime 4. That's why they didn't try and make that initial project with Bandai Namco supposedly work. They scrapped it and they went with something that they felt would be to a high degree of quality, something matching the original series, which is some of the highest rated games of all time, which again, I would say is quite comparable to the scale and ambition of Zelda. So it's a big deal, a very big budget game, it's gonna take time, and yes, that's a very good reason to keep your expectations in check and not expect it to come out so soon. However, I think Nintendo is gearing up for Metroid Prime 4. I think it all started with Metroid Dread. I think Nintendo has a big marketing campaign planned to revive the Metroid brand. They've done a great job with Metroid Dread so far. They had a lot of marketing for that. It's now on pace to be the best-selling Metroid game of all time. It's very close as of December 31st. It's almost certainly going to pass it. It may have already done so by this point in time. And this is just the beginning, I think. There are a lot of rumors suggesting that this year we'll be seeing the release for a Metroid Prime remake. Now, this is rumored, but it's being rumored by some fairly credible sources, such as Emily Rogers and Nate the Hate and Jeff Grubb, all sources who have told us about other things in the past and have been right, such as Metroid Dread. So I definitely think there's a decent chance that this is actually happening, and it does make sense to come out with something Metroid to hold us over until the release of Metroid Prime 4, and they may want to use something from the Prime series to sort of acquaint fans to the Prime style of gameplay. So I do think that there is likely a Metroid Prime something coming out this year, probably a remaster or remake of the first one, maybe the trilogy, but I'm gonna bank on it just being the first one, but still a fairly ambitious remaster of the first one. And then next year, I think we'll be open for Prime 4. So assuming this is actually the case, we got Dread last year, Prime Remaster this year, Prime 4 next year, the timing of that would kind of work out pretty well, and you would have a build-up of different Metroid games building on the brand and popularity of the series, and ultimately hopefully culminating in a banger of a seller in Prime 4. That's what I believe Nintendo wants, that's what I believe Nintendo is doing here, and I think we're seeing a few more signs of a build-up of this hype and attention for Prime 4, because recently we did see that Retro Studios, a company who doesn't really say much, put something out on their social media. Their Twitter page, they updated their banner, and there's a few other things circulating, but it appears to be the first concept art for Metroid Prime 4. Now, we've already had a video on that. We had a discussion with Realtor Review and Super Mario Day 64 the other day. You can check those out. But the point is, Retro Studios doesn't update their Twitter with anything but the occasional meme every couple months related to Prime Rib, and they post job hirings. That's it. That's all they do. So them updating with this very interesting art that is clearly for the Metroid Prime series, but not related to any of the first three, there's a pretty good chance that this is concept art for Metroid Prime 4, and at the very least, it's alluding to them working on Prime 4, and they normally don't put out art like this, so it's clearly a tease of some sort, which to me suggests that there is a sort of opening of the floodgates of the discussion on what this game could be. Now, to be fully clear, we do not have 100% confirmation that this banner art is official concept art for Metroid Prime 4. A lot of us think it is, with great confidence, but we don't know that for a fact, so definitely take that with a grain of salt. But for the sake of argument, let's assume it is. If that's the case, then let's compare it to a situation like when they teased Splatoon 3. So at the beginning of 2020, they put out a piece of concept art that seemed at the time perhaps just celebrating the Happy New Year, but as it turned out, this salmonid SOS signal thing was actually a tease for the actual story content of Splatoon 3, and Splatoon 3 is coming out summer 2022. So based off when that art was shown off at the beginning of 2020, there is quite a bit of a window there. It's about a 2.5-year window. So if we were to consider this banner art to be of a similar vein, then perhaps the implication is we won't be seeing Prime 4 until sometime late into 2024. But there's a few different things to consider here. One, there isn't necessarily any rule on when concept art should be revealed and teasing a game in relation to when that game is coming out. But then another, when this concept art came out for Splatoon 3, COVID was breaking out. And that has led to a lot of delays with development and such. And I don't have a hard number on this, but I feel like for most projects, they were delayed by about a year. In some cases more, in some cases a little less, depending on the ambition and scope of the project and such, and obviously just simply how they were impacted by remote development and things of that nature, so there's obviously a lot of variation there, but that definitely lengthened development for a lot of different projects. So for something big like Metroid Prime 4, let's say it has delayed it at least a year. Now, let me show you something from a few years ago. In an interview with Eurogamer, Kensuke Tanabe, the Prime producer, was asked about the potential for a Prime on the Wii U. If we start on the Wii U now, it would likely take 3 years or so. So it would likely now be on the Nintendo's NX console. The NX is the Nintendo Switch. It was revealed a couple years later, and in 2017, development was confirmed, but development was restarted, or at least announced to be restarted, January 2019. So maybe development started a couple months beforehand, that's possible, but let's just assume January 2019. Based off what Kensuke Tanabe is saying, it would take about 3 years or so to make a Metroid Prime game. So if we start at 2019, January 2019, and we go 3 years into the future, that puts us around now, the beginning of 2022. But then let's also assume COVID has caused delays. That's at least another year. That puts us at around the beginning of 2023. But Prime 4 may be pretty grand in scope, and he did say 3 years or so. It is an estimate. Maybe it takes a few more months. And also maybe they started development a few months before they announced the actual restart. Which I think kind of is maybe less than a year total in terms of adding into the development there, but let's say that puts us at around a second half of 2023 release. And I think that's relatively fair. If we assume that it would need to take at least 3 years of development, but if we also factor in COVID, that maybe adds another year. And from the restart, we at least know they started at January 2019 at the very latest. You add 4 years from there, that brings us into the beginning of 2023. But something like Metroid Prime 4 probably would take more than just a mere 3 years, so you add a few more months there. Maybe Nintendo will spend more time polishing it up, getting it ready. Maybe COVID impacted it more. There's a number of things that could push it up a little bit more. But based off the release timing of things, with Metroid Dread coming in the second half of the year, with Prime Remake being rumored for the second half of the year, with this banner art suggesting that Nintendo's starting to build up that marketing, perhaps teasing the game at this year's E3 or around that time, then everything sort of seems primed for a second half of 2023 release for Metroid Prime 4. And that's why I'm predicting Metroid Prime 4 for 2023 in the second half of the year. But what do you guys think? When do you guys think we'll get to see Metroid Prime 4, and when do you think it'll be coming out? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.